In this grade 12 business studies question paper, we are looking at essay predictions for your term 1 test that is coming up. We are going to look at that term 1 scope as a whole, meaning what you can expect out of your question paper, the topics that you can expect out of your question paper, but mostly the focus on this video is on the essay predictions, meaning what could come up out of your essays in terms of your section C of your question paper. Now I have linked for you guys 4 question papers in the description box below, so make sure you go to the description box and you download those papers. They are the ones we are going to use as our past March papers in order to look at how these question papers have set up this essay. So let's start with a term 1 scope and look at the topics really that are going to be in your question paper. So term 1 scope, we are looking at your legislative acts. By the way, all of these topics we have already done section A and section B questions on them, so if you are looking for those, you can go into my channel and you will see those linked and watch them. But here we are going to look at now the essay portions of this topics, because we have already done these topics on their own. What we haven't done is the essays on them. So we have legislative acts as number 1. Legislative acts, you know that you have 9 acts in there, and every single one of those 9 acts can be your essay. They can make an essay out of any one of the 9 acts. And then you have a human resource function. In the human resource functions, has different sections. It has recruitment, selections, all of those different things can also be made an essay out of. But usually with the human resource function, it's usually a mix of a lot of things. So if you have studied the topic of human resource as function as a whole, you can be able to answer a topic on human resources, unlike legislative acts, because if you do 5 out of the 9, those 4 that you didn't do, it could be possibly the ones that will come out. But remember, in your term 1, you are only required to answer only 1 topic. So my recommendation would be for you to, if you had to choose between human resources and legislative acts, it would be to study human resources. Why? Because I do believe that in your term 1 question paper there will be a legislative act question. In terms of essays, there will be an essay on legislative acts. What we cannot tell you is which one of those acts will be in that question. So that means when you're choosing the topic of legislative acts, you can either study legislative acts only and study all 9, which means you'll be prepared for 9 essays, or you can study the rest of the topic, being the human resource function, ethics and professionalism, creative thinking and problem solving, and business strategies. Because what I do think will happen in your term 1 question paper is that you're going to have 2 questions. One of them is going to be on legislative acts, and the other one is going to be on either one of those 4 topics that you see underneath there. So what I'm saying is, if you get to the question paper and you had studied human resource, you had studied ethics and professionalism, and you had studied creative thinking and business strategies, what you can do is you can choose those topics, because look at the odds, right? If you study legislative acts, you're basically going to have to prepare for 9 essays, whereas when you're studying the rest of those 4 topics that come below, you're only studying for 4 topics. So that means when you look at that question paper, what you're going to choose is going to be the question that is not the legislative act question, because it's going to be legislative act 1 and the other one will be any one of those 4 topics. So that's how I would approach it going into the exam. So let's look at an essay structure. So for you to say that you have completed an essay question, what are they expecting from you? You need an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. That is standard for any essay in any subject, right? In business studies, remember that you are answering in bullet form, hence you are seeing me using dashes there. So what are you writing under your introduction? My thing for introduction is that it's very simple. You shouldn't have to stress about how you start a business studies essay. It's not like an English or a home language essay. It's a business essay. So if the question, for example, it's on a legislative act, BBEE, for example, define a term just means define to us what is triple BEE. What do you think triple BEE is? You would have answered the question. If it's about human resources, if you just define human resources in your introduction, you would have done that. It's only 2 marks. So you give me one definition of one term that you see in your question paper and you would be done. Now we are going to look at some essay questions from different question papers, and I will show you how I would introduce each and every single one of those topics, meaning which term would I define depending on the topic that I've been given for my essay. But basically, if you keep it in your mind that what you have to do for introduction is just define a term, then you should be fine. Then we move on to the body. The body starts with subheadings. I don't think that you are supposed to write the heading body, but you are just supposed to write the subheadings. The subheadings are simple. They give them to you. It's those bullet points that they give you in the essay saying write about this and then outline this, and then those things, they become your subheading. So for example, if they said outline the purpose of the triple BEE, your first subheading becomes the purpose of the BEE. If the second one said give the disadvantages of the BEE, that's your second heading, disadvantages of the BEE. So just write your subheadings, let them be clear, and underline them, because they show the marker where that you have answered every question that you needed to answer, because it's differentiated into sections. It makes your paper even easier to mark and it becomes straightforward. Then I always say that under each subheading, give at least 5 points. It also depends on the mark allocation on your essay. For the term 1 essays, they're usually an overall mark of 40 marks. But if you give 5 points under each subheading, you should be fine. Lastly, you have the conclusion. The conclusion is very simple, you guys. You just give your opinion on why you think whatever you're discussing is important. If it's BEE, just give me by your opinion, why do you think BEE is important? So let's start with legislative acts and look at how those essays will look like. So for example, we are looking there at a business studies question paper from March in KZN 2023, right? It said question 5, business environment legislation. The Employment Equity Act EEA of 1999, Act 55 of 1999, was introduced to promote equity in the workplace. Equal opportunities are given to everyone regardless of race, gender, disability, etc. Businesses not complying with EEA requirements could face penalties. Then it says, write an essay on the Employment Equity Act in which you include the following aspects. Number 1, outline the purpose of the EEA. Number 2, explain the impact of the EEA on businesses. Number 3, discuss ways in which the business could comply with the EEA. And then lastly, advise the business on penalties and consequences for non-compliance with the act. So you are seeing that it's a legislative act question. They have obviously chosen the Employment Equity Act. Like I said, with the legislation, it could literally be any one of the 9 acts. So this one, they have chosen EEA. There was no way of me of knowing this, but if you have studied it, you should be fine with it. My headings are those 4 bullet points. The purpose, the impacts, I'm going to divide it into advantages and disadvantages. Then I'm going to do compliance and then penalties. So look at how I would structure my essay. This is how I would do it. In my introduction, what am I going to define? I'm going to explain what the EEA is. Now, for you, they have made things simpler. The wording in the box, or the scenario they gave you in that box at the beginning of the question, basically describe to you what the Employment Equity Act is. I would just paraphrase that and have that be my discussion of, or my introduction of my EEA. They said the Employment Equity Act was introduced to promote equity in the workplace. Equal opportunities are given to everyone regardless of race, gender, disability, etc. I would stop there. That's my introduction. No one can tell you that you did not do your introduction proper. You have explained what the employment equity is. It would be weird for you to get into an essay of something without telling me what that thing is. So you can't go wrong even if it's included in there. I know that some students will be afraid of including that part in there just because it's already in the box, but no, it's part of your essay unless they specifically told you do not code. But then again, I didn't code. I was just paraphrase that sentence, right? Then we get to the body. The body, look at my subheadings. I took all of those bullet points they gave me there and I put them as my subheadings. What I would get for the content of these subheadings is from, we had already discussed it in the video that we did on legislative acts. So if you want to know about the purpose of the EEA, go to that video. It will give you at least 5 points. If not, in that video we have also linked the notes to the legislative acts. So if you are wanting those notes and you don't have those notes, go to that video and you will find the notes to the legislative acts. It includes every single one of those 9 acts, right? So in there it will tell you what the purpose of the EEA is. Get 5 points from that video and put it under your purpose of the EEA. Then they said the second thing was impacts. Anytime they tell you impacts, I already discussed this even in that video, that anytime they tell you impacts means advantages and disadvantages, and we expect to see both. So I would take 5 advantages and 5 disadvantages. And then second last, they said compliance. I would take some points on compliance. And then lastly, I will take penalties. Penalties are usually never up to 5, but because I would have covered 5 things on the ones that came on top, like in the purpose and in the advantages and disadvantages, I should have enough marks. Even if I gave 1 or 2 points in penalties, I should still be covered because each point is worth 2 marks and I'm just gunning for the 40 marks. So my recommendation is write this essay structure in your book, right? And then fill it out for yourself. Start with the introduction, and then in that introduction, write down what the purpose of the EEA is. Paraphrase it in your own words. So you are going to say introduction, that's your heading, underline it. Under it, write what the EEA is. So you're just going to say the employment equity is blah blah blah, and then continue. That would be your introduction. And then get to the body. In the body, you don't write the topic body, you just start with the purpose of the EEA, right? Then under the purpose of the EEA, give me 5 points. Where are you going to get those 5 points? Go back to the video of legislative acts and look for 5 points to put under there. If you get to that video and I have for some reason maybe given 4 points, there is a link to the notes. Download it and make sure that you add 1 more point, and then do the same thing for advantages, disadvantages, and then do the same thing for compliance and penalties. For purpose, advantages and disadvantages, ensure that it is 5 points each under them. That would have made you at least 30 marks because 2 points each, right? And then for compliance, if in case your compliances are short and your penalties are short, at least you would be covered. Then lastly, on your conclusion, you're going to then tell me why do you think the EA is important, but we'll get to that in a second. Why am I saying you should do what I'm telling you to do for the introduction and the body? I'm telling you to do that and put it in your notes for business studies. That way, when you study the topic of the EEA, you are studying it as an essay instead of just studying notes that are just given to you, right? Study it in a format of an essay because you would have wrote it in your own words in the format of an essay. Then also do the same thing for your conclusion. Now, the conclusion does not need you to refer back to that video. It just needs you. In your opinion, why do you think the Employment Equity Act is important? In your opinion, guys, you can't go wrong. And remember, if you don't write a conclusion, then you didn't complete an essay structure. So then you will see there that I have given some more options from a different question paper on how the topic of legislation can come up. This one is a common test from April 2021, right? And it says that you need to write an essay on Skills Development Act, which includes the following aspects. So you see here we are writing about the SDA every note on the SDA, you will still find it on that same video we talked about. So you can do the same thing for the SDA and then put it in your notes and study it as an essay. Similarly, we have another question from 2018, and it's on the National Credit Act. This one wanted you to write an essay on the National Credit Act. Those 4 bullet points becomes your heading. Where do you get the information? You go back to that video. Put these essays in your notes so that when you study them, even for June, even for your mock test, you will be studying them as essays. So let's look at now the human resource function essay. How will that one look like? So we have question 6 from the 2018 question paper. It says, the financial manager of KK Movers and Shakers Pty Ltd recently announced his retirement. And Nalini, the human resource manager, needs to find a new financial manager. Nalini had to compile a job description and a job specification before advertising the position. She has advertised the position on the business's notice board. She also responsible for arrangements during the selection process. Refer to the scenario above and write an essay which you include the following aspects. Distinguish between job description and job specification. Number 2, discuss the impact of internal recruitment on businesses. Number 3, explain the selection procedure that Nalini should follow to identify the most suitable candidate. And lastly, advise Nalini on the purpose of the interview and the role and her role as an interviewer. So those 4 bullet points now become my headings. So the first heading is job description and job specification. That will be me distinguishing between those two. You are more than welcome to write it as a table format. In the video that we did on human resources, you will see that it's in a table format. Then the second heading will be impact. Remember, I said impact, it has to be both advantages and disadvantages, so remember to separate those. And then the next heading will be selection procedure. The last one will be, again, 2 things: the purpose of interview and the role of interviewer. So you see it there as I have put it in the way I would write this essay. In my introduction, what would I do? I would start by describing what the HR function is. I would start by defining what is human resource. That is my introduction, because remember, I'm writing my essay on what you call human resource function, so it wouldn't make sense for me to just jump into it without explaining what human resource is. So that would be what I would put for my introduction. Then for my body, I have my subheadings just as I have listed them. Where am I going to get the content from for these subheadings? We have done a video on human resource functions in which we also included the notes to the human resource function. So whatever you can't find in the video will definitely be in those notes in the description box of that video, so you can go there and download those notes. And then also learn to write your human resource function as an essay. Guys, it's very easy when you start everything in business as an essay, because when you get to writing essays, you will not have a problem. And when you are in section A and section B, you just have to remember the fact of the things that fall under your essay. So studying things as an essay like just does a 3-in-1 for you. It covers your section A, it covers your section B, and your section C as well, because you know how to write those things. So for example, when you have written the description of what a human resource function is in your introduction, when you're in section A and they give you different descriptions and they say which one of these is defines the HR function, that's not going to be a problem for you, because you have already done that as part of your introduction, right? So I have all of my headings as listed there, so make sure you list them as well, and then you put everything that falls underneath. And then for conclusion, why do you think HR is important? This one is your opinion, so you can't go wrong. Just make sure you write something. Then in the next topic is ethics and professionalism. We are going to look at that topic from the question paper of 2020 March, and it says, a company which applies the core principles of good corporate governance will have competitive advantage over companies over other companies. Creativity in the workplace environment should be encouraged to ensure sustainability and success. So this question, you can see that it mixed two different topics, ethics and professionalism and creative thinking. But I want us to look at a question that will basically focus more on professionalism, but you can still use this essay as well to practice what you are going to write under your essays. I've told you those bullet points then become your headings. So what I want to do now is to look at now a question that is more focused on professionalism and ethics. It says business, this one is the March 2023 one. It says businesses are expected to conduct their operations in ethical and professional manner guided by the King Code principles of good corporate governance. Tax evasion and sexual harassment may pose challenges to the business. Businesses should therefore develop strategies to deal with these practices to remain competitive and sustainable. So you can hear that talking about competitiveness, which they talked about in the scenario before, and in those bullet points they also talked about things like tax evasion and sexual harassment. So it's more of the same topics, but just if you needed a variety, you can also do that question as well. What I'm going to give you the structure for is this one. Unfortunately, this one has a little bit of an error. It says write an essay on the Employment Equity Act in which you include the following. It was supposed to say write an essay on professionalism and ethics in which you include the following things. So it wants you to first outline which professional, responsible, ethical and effective business practices should be conducted. Number 2, explain how businesses can apply transparency and accountability as King Code principles for good corporate governance. Number 3, discuss how tax evasion and sexual harassment pose challenges for businesses. Then lastly, recommend strategies to deal with unethical and unprofessional business practices discussed above. Now, that was a mouthful. Let's start with our introduction. What am I defining in my introduction? I'm going to define what is ethics and what is professionalism. Simple as that. If you want, you can just discuss ethics alone or professionalism alone, or the definition be the difference between the two of them. You would have kept it as simple as possible, and that gets me into my essay. Is a good way to introduce me to this essay. Then in my body, remember the content of the body, you're going to get it in the video we have already done on professionalism and ethics. In that video, similarly, we have notes on professionalism and ethics in the description box below. But I want us to pay careful attention to my body. What are my headings? Because those 4 bullets had a lot in them, right? The first one said ways in which to promote professional and ethical practices. So my first heading will be professional and ethical practices, which under it I will just describe ways to promote professional and ethical business practices, which you will also find in the notes in that video we just talked about. The third one talked about King Code principles of transparency and accountability. So I'm going to separate them and make 2 different subheadings. The first one being transparency. So I'm going to discuss transparency according to the King Code, and then secondly, discuss accountability according to the King Code. Then the third one talked about unfair and professional business practices, which were tax evasion and sexual harassment. With them also, I'm going to separate them, discuss tax evasion as an unethical business practice, as well as in the next subheading I will now discuss sexual harassment as an unethical and unprofessional business practice. Then the last bullet said what would be the strategies to deal with the unethical business production mentioned above. Which were the above mentioned? It was the tax evasion and the sexual harassment. So that's why I'm going to specify it. Strategies for tax evasion, strategies for sexual harassment. So I have separated them. So which means in the end I ended up with 7 subtopics. Now I know that it is a lot. What I would do is, instead of discussing 5 topics under each one of these, I would maybe reduce it to 3 bullet points under each one of these. But what's most important is that all of these 7 subheadings need to be there. Don't compromise on your subheadings. I would rather compromise the bullet points, because the bullet points, each bullet point carries 2 marks, but you need to have all of these subheadings. Then lastly, in my conclusion, that's when you are going to discuss why is ethics and professionalism important. So why do you think, in your opinion, ethical and professionalism in business is important? This is your opinion. Why do you think it's important? Then you would have concluded your essay on professionalism and ethics. And now we move on to creative thinking and problem solving. So for this one, we have the April 2021 question paper. By the way, if I'm moving too fast for you, remember you're more than welcome to pause, to take notes, to come back to this video. You can never watch it too many times, right? So we have our creative thinking and problem solving question. It says it's of crucial importance that businesses have processes and problem solving techniques in place to overcome the challenges to solve business related problems. Management should provide an environment that will stimulate creative thinking in the workplace to maximize benefits. Consider the statement above and provide detailed account of the following, meaning write an essay on: first, outline the problem solving steps. Number 2, explain how businesses can apply the following problem solving techniques. That's the Delphi technique and brainstorming. Number 3, discuss the advantages. See, it didn't say impact, it just said advantages, so you can only do one here. We don't need the disadvantages of creative thinking in the workplace. And then lastly, recommend ways in which businesses can create an environment that promote creative thinking in the workplace. So that third bullet point, this is very important, because it shows you when they're looking for advantages only, they will only say advantages, but if they say impact, you need to do both. So we are going to now look at my structure of how I would write this creative thinking essay, right? In my introduction, what would I describe? I would describe what creative thinking is, since that's what we are doing. The scenario also guides you of what's important to the question. They talked more about creative thinking than they do about problem solving. Okay, you need creative thinking for you to problem solve. So the issue here is mostly, or the concern here is creative thinking. So that's why defining creative thinking becomes more important than anything else. Then in my subheadings, they first said outline the steps to problem solving. That would be my first heading, steps to problem solving. The steps to problem solving, by the way, you guys, I know that they come in order. If you remember them according to their order, that would be most preferable. But I just want you to know that sometimes the memorandum is lenient enough that even if they're not in their proper order, you can still get those marks, right? And then the second one said discuss the problem solving technique. They talked about the Delphi technique and the brainstorming technique. Each one of those is going to become their own subheading. So I'm going to have a heading that says Delphi technique. Under it, I'll discuss what a Delphi technique is. And then the next one will be brainstorming, which under it I will discuss what brainstorming is. If you are again looking for the explanations of these techniques, we have a video on creative thinking and problem solving, which also has the notes to the same topic in that video. So make sure that you go to that video, and it will give you what you need to put under these Delphi technique and brainstorming, as well as those problem solving steps that we did before. Right? Then the next topic is the advantages of creative thinking. They didn't say impact, they said only advantages. You will also find them in this video. If they are not in the video itself, they will be in the notes that are linked in the description box of that video. Then lastly, they said promoting creative thinking in the workplace. So this would be my last subheading, under which I will discuss ways for promoting creative thinking in the workplace. Then you remember that every single one of these things that you need to discuss, including those ways to promote creative thinking. You can find them in the video that we discussed before. The mark allocation should guide you. Remember, introduction and conclusion are only 2 marks, so that's 4 marks. So it's up to you how you're going to divide the rest of those marks according to your body, but I still recommend a maximum of 5 points and a minimum of 3 points under each subheading. If you keep it that way, you are not going to go wrong, especially if you cover all of your subheadings. If you do all of your subheadings and you did a minimum of 3 points under each of your subheadings, then it should be able for you to cover what you need, because remember, each bullet point is going to be out of 2 marks. So if I had discussed 3 points under problem solving itself, well, for problem solving steps, because it's problem solving steps, this one you cannot cheat. You should at least have as many of those steps as possible, even if they are not in their correct order. But for the rest of the things, the Delphi technique, the brainstorming, the advantages, and the promoting, you can limit it to 3 points underneath. Then lastly, you are looking at your conclusion. In your conclusion, you are telling us, in your opinion, why do you think creative thinking is important. The only way to not get marks on conclusion is if you did not write anything. If you wrote something there, it doesn't have to be professional, it doesn't have to be out of a textbook. Actually, it's not supposed to be out of a textbook, because it's supposed to be your opinion. Then last topic we are going to look at is the business strategies. We are going to go through it with the help of a 2020 March question paper. The question 5 of it said, business strategies are developed in response to business challenges. A planned strategic management process should be in place to implement the most suitable strategies. Write an essay on business strategies in which you include the following aspects. Number 1, outline the steps in developing a strategy. Number 2, describe the strategic management process. Yes, there are 2 different things. Number 3, discuss the 3 types of integration strategies that businesses may use to address challenges in the macro environment. And then lastly, advise businesses on the advantages, not impacts, just advantages of intensive strategies. So in this one, I'm looking at my business strategies. So my subheadings, number 1, it's the steps of developing a strategy. Number 2 is the strategic management process. Like I said, those 2 things are not the same things, they're different steps. And then number 3 types of integration strategies. So that means out of bullet point number 3, you're going to have 3 subheadings. That means you will now have to remember what are the integration strategies. There's 3 of them, so you're going to list them and discuss every single one of them. There's 3 of them. And then lastly, it says advice on the advantages of intensive strategies. For this one, you don't have to list the intensive strategies, you just have to discuss the disadvantages of intensive strategies. In the video that we did on this topic, you will find the notes that include all of these things. But before we get into that, let's look at the structure of how I would write this essay. In my introduction, I would firstly describe what is a business strategy, since that's what we are talking about. So a business strategy, or even just defining what a strategy is, because the topic here is mostly based on a strategy, and that's what we are focused on. So just defining a business strategy, or defining what a business strategy is, you would have introduced your essay well. Then you move on to your body. In your body, it is those steps. Now you have those subheadings. You're going to put them as your headings and underline them. What goes under them again is in the business video we did on business strategies. In that video, we also have the notes to business strategies that will include anything else we did not discuss in the videos, because in the videos I was discussing what I think, in my opinion, would be the most important things for you to remember, meaning not that the rest is not important, but it's a matter of priority, in that what are going to be the things that are going to repeat themselves. So in your March test, if you find business strategies, you might find that thing, and then when you go to May, June, you may still find that thing in September, in November. So they are going to be the things that are very important for you to remember about the topic going forward. There are some things that are still important but of less importance, so they may show up in March but not show up in the May, June question paper, for example. So remember, we said you're going to start with the steps of developing a strategy as your first subheading. Secondly, strategic management process. Third, you are going to now separate your integration strategies. We have the forward integration, the backwards integration strategy, and the horizontal integration strategy. So that becomes 3 subheadings that fall under that third bullet point alone. You need to separate them so that the marker can also see that you wrote different you understood the 3 different strategies and you understand what they are and you were able to outline them. It makes marking your paper easier, and it also shows that you are able to understand, because if you just answer it in just one bullet point, you just said integration strategies and discuss them as bullet points under the marker may not see that you were able to identify all 3 of the integration strategies. So you need to be strategic, like the subheadings becomes a strategy for you in answering your question paper. You are showing the marker that you know what is required, right? And sometimes you may not even be able to explain the forward integration strategy proper, but the mere fact that you were able to outline that I have a forward integration, the backward integration, and the horizontal integration, you may find that gets you better mark. They may mark like 1 point each under them, and somehow you find that you are still doing better because of how you outlined your essay. Essay structure is very important. It gives you this advantage, as well as your advantages for intensive strategies. You just write the heading advantages. The marker already understands that all of those bullet points under there are just advantages. Because if you just write intensive strategies, it could be anything. It could be you discussing different types of intensive strategies. It could be you discussing the impacts instead of just the advantages. So when you write your subheadings proper and they're clear that under here I'm discussing advantages of intensive strategies only, the marker is able to see that you understood what the question wanted and you answered the question as you were supposed to. Then lastly, in our conclusion, why is developing a strategy important? Now, how you start your conclusion, you can start by developing a strategy is important because. That's how you then give your opinion from under there, and just like that, you would have finished your essay. If you have YouTube recommend you more of my videos, be sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below.